So church, let's start then with our Bible study as we continue with systematic theology. And I just wanted to remind you as well where we were in the last 2 weeks. And you will remember that in the last 2 weeks we taught you about the 10 divisions of systematic theology, the 10 ways in which Bible has been divided, the teachings of the Bible have been divided. And we mentioned bibliology, the study of the Bible; theology proper, the study of God; Christology, the study of Christ; hematology, the study of the Holy Spirit; anthropology, the study of human beings; amartiology, the study of sin; soteriology, the study of salvation; angelology, the study of the holy and fallen angels; ecclesiology, the study of the church; and anthropology, the study of the things that will happen in the end times. And I mentioned that we need to teach our children these things so that they may remember them. We don't want them to just learn them and then forget them. And then we used an example of how important are these things. How can we see these divisions of the Bible? And we used John chapter 3 verse 16. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life." And I mentioned that for God is theology proper, that so loved is soteriology, that the world is anthropology, that his only Son is Christology, that whoever believes in him is soteriology, and should not perish is hamartiology, and eternal life is eschatology and soteriology. Just to make you see that what we are doing is not just academic study. It's not things that we just do, people might just do in seminary, in Bible colleges, but it is things that are applicable to us as everyday Christians who are not studying these things. So you can go to the next slide, and then one of the Sunday school children will come and give us all 10 of the divisions of systematic theology. You mention it, and then you tell us what it means. So the ones who came last week are not coming. So I want the new ones who are coming this week. Any volunteers? So I'm going to start pointing fingers. Keke, you want to come? You can come and do 5 if you know 5. Come and do 5, Keke. But I know you are so smart, you're going to do all 10 of them.
The theology, the study of the Bible; ecclesiology, the study of the church; soteriology, the study of salvation; theology proper, the study of God; eschatology, the study of the end times; Christology, the study of Christ; anthropology, the study of human nature; angelology, the study of angels; pneumatology, the study of the Holy Spirit; and hamartiology, the study of sin.
Alright, and then last week then we started with theology proper, and we mentioned that before we can study anything else, as far as Christianity is concerned, we must first learn about God. We don't learn about the Bible first, because the Bible comes from God. So we need to learn about the source of the Bible, who is God, and then we can learn about the Bible and learn about the other doctrines of the Bible as well. And I mentioned that this is where we are. We are on theology proper, the study of God. And when we are done with theology proper, we will go to bibliology. And when we're done with bibliology, we'll go to eschatology. So although we put them in this order, but that is not how we're going to teach you in this order. We're going to start with theology proper, we're going to go to bibliology, and we're going to go to the first part of eschatology, and then we will go to Christology. And then last week then we started with theology proper, and the first thing we learn about God, about the study of God, is does God exist? That is the first question that you have to study about God. And we gave you 4 ways that we can know that God exists. And the first one we said, God testifies to his own existence. That God tells us that he exists. And the second one is that people testify of God's existence, that God has revealed himself to people. And the third one we said, nature testifies of God's existence. What we mean by that is that everything that has been created, the heavens and the earth, are proof that God exists, because God has created the heavens and the earth. And the last one we said, salvation testifies of God's existence. We mean that Christians are proof that God exists, because no one can be saved unless God really exists. So then we can go to the next slide, and one of the Sunday school child will come and give us the 4 ways in which we can know that God exists. Who's coming? Naledi? Come and give us the 4 ways in which you can know that God exists. Number 1? Okay, let's speak louder. God testifies of his own existence. Number 2? People testify of God's existence. Number 3? Nature testifies of God's existence. And number 4? Salvation testifies of God's existence. So let's give you. So brethren, today we are going to deal. So now we have dealt with the fact that God exists, and we have provided you with reasons why there are people who say God does not exist. And we mentioned that there is proof that God exists, but because of people's unrighteousness or people's love to be thought of as wise, they come up with arguments that God does not exist. So today then, we are dealing with the name of God. So we know that God exists, but who is this God? Does he have a name? And that is what we are dealing with here. So the first thing is, why teach about the names of God? Why should you care what the name of God is? Why can't you just call him God? And the first reason we say is that the name of God tells us of his character. The name of God tells us of his character. So what we mean by that is that the names of God tells us of who God is. They tell us of who God is. They are intentional names. They are names which are meant to give a meaning to us, to communicate something of who God is. It's like my name. My name is Silva. People mistake my name to think that because I cry a lot. They misunderstand. They don't understand that my name means I make people cry a lot. So names have a meaning. You know, it's like what my wife did with our last born. She named our last born Mateo. But we like, that means foundation. And he's the last born. That doesn't make sense. Huh? Or what the Masubeleles did with their firstborn. Kekeles. Edition. But that's the first one. It can't be an edition. So names are meant to communicate something, like the members. Huh? So they want to tell you how happy they were with that children. They said Togos. Okay, we know now you are happy. Then non-Togos. Because names mean something. So the names of God, they have a meaning. And that is why we must be able to learn about the names of God. And the second reason is that the names of God are from God himself. So God has named himself. No one has given God his name. He's the one who has given us his name. And by that, it shows that God thinks that his name are important. By giving himself names, it means that he considers his name to be important. And what that also means is that he wants himself to be identifiable through his names. And I'll put an example there of Exodus chapter 3, verse 15. So Moses then meets God in a burning bush. And then God says, go to the children of Israel in Egypt and go and tell them that I have sent you. And then Moses asks a good question and says, when they ask me, who is this God, what am I supposed to do? And then God says in verse 15, this is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all the generations. So God gives him his name. And after God gives Moses his name, then he says to Moses, I want myself to be remembered by this name throughout all generations. So that just shows you how important the name of God are. And then the third reason we see is that people care about the names of God. People care. So when you come and say, I'm talking about God, people are going to ask you, which God are you talking about? When you go to India, God means many different things to many different people. Because Indians have millions of gods. So when you ask, so when you say God in India, then people are not going to understand exactly what you mean. You must be specific. Which God are you talking about? And here we see the same thing in Exodus chapter 5 verse 2. So God sent Moses to go to Egypt, and Moses goes to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says in chapter 5 verse 2, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know of the Lord. So Pharaoh knows that they are gods. And then Moses comes and says, God has sent me. The Lord has sent me. Then Pharaoh says, but who is this God you are talking about? So people care about the names of God. And then the fourth reason is that God considers his names to be holy. God considers his names to be holy. In Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 25 and in Isaiah chapter 52 verse 5, we see that the God desires his name to be honored amongst all people. So he wants, when people think of his name, to think in terms of reverence. So he gives us his names so that his names may be revered. People may think highly of him. And then the second thing we see in the 10 commandments. What is the 5th commandment? Who knows what is the 5th commandment?
Thou shalt not preach for over 60 minutes.
So in Exodus chapter 20 verse 7, somebody had his name up. Who? Naledi? You know? Okay. Is it the 4th or the 5th? Which one? You shall not misuse the name of the Lord in vain.
So what's the 5th one?
Right there. Between the 4th and the 5th. So in Exodus chapter 20 verse 7, God says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So the Lord considers his name to be holy. He considers his name to be special, to be sacred, to be something that people do not just play around with, but something that people consider to be holy. But for you to be able to consider the name of God to be holy, you must know the name of God. So these then are the 4 reasons why we teach about the names of God. And the 5th one, that is not here, is that you're going to meet the Jehovah's Witnesses. Huh? And then when we come to a Jehovah's Witness and we talk about God, they're going to say, no. Who's God? It is Jehovah. Huh? So that is one of the reasons. So then let's look at the names of God. And the first name of God is Yahweh. Yahweh. Y-A-H-W-E-H. And this is the name that we see God giving to us in Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And God then says of his name Yahweh, this is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So Yahweh, it is explained here in Exodus 3 verse 14, by God saying, I am who I am. Or I am. Or I will be who I will be. That is the first name of God that we see, Yahweh. And then this name points, what does this name mean? Remember we said that the names of God have a meaning. And we say this name tries to communicate to us that God is an unchanging God. God is an unchanging God. So Yahweh explains to us, God is using the name Yahweh to explain to us that he is the unchanging God. And we see the same meaning of the name Yahweh being used in the New Testament as well. The same expression that God is communicating through the name Yahweh. In the New Testament, we use the words like Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the one who is and who was and who is to come, the beginning and the end. Those names, they communicate something. They tell you that God is not changing. God is the first and the last. And that is what the name tries to communicate. But here's the interesting thing. The Jews were afraid to use this name Yahweh. So they will have the books of Moses. It will be written in the books of Moses. But they were afraid to use it. So they will see it, but they will not pronounce it as Yahweh. They will pronounce it differently. And here's the reason. In Leviticus chapter 24 verse 16, it says that whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. So the one who misuses the name of God shall be put to death. So Jews then lived having this idea in mind that I might blaspheme the name of the Lord. So because of that, they were afraid to use the name of God, Yahweh. So what they did in scripture, when it is written Yahweh, they will pronounce it as Adonai, or they will pronounce it as Elohim, so that they might not use this direct name of God, because they were afraid that they may blaspheme this name of God. And of course, they wanted this name of God to be considered holy. They considered this name to be so sacred, so special, that no human being is allowed to pronounce. So when they were reading, instead of saying Yahweh, they will say Adonai, but they will say Elohim. Then, this name has developed in our Bibles. We are using the name Jehovah. Jehovah. And this name Jehovah came about because we combined the name Yahweh and Adonai to come up with Jehovah. So when you read your English Bible, I think specifically the King James Version, you will see reference to Jehovah. And Jehovah is a combination of Yahweh and Adonai, and then we came with the name Jehovah, which tries to communicate the same meaning of a God who is unchanging. So then, in your English Bibles, when you read, your English Bibles will use Lord, L-O-R-D, Lord, to refer to God. But I don't know if you have realized, this Lord is written in two different ways. There is Lord, which is written in capital letters, or the first letter L will be in big capital letters, and then O-R-D will be in small but capital letters. And then there will be another Lord, where only the first letter L will be in capital letters, then the rest of the letters will be in small letters. So when you see your Bible then using capital letters, Lord, then it is referring to this name of God, Yahweh. And when it is using the small letters, then it is referring to Adonai. So then, Yahweh, Sunday school children, this is your test for next week. Yahweh, we said, it communicates that God is the unchanging God. And then we said, how did we come up with the name Jehovah? We took Yahweh, we took Adonai, and we brought them together, and then we came with the name Jehovah. And then we said, English Bible has Lord, but there is Lord with capital letters, and there is Lord with small letters. And Lord with capital letters refers to Yahweh, and Lord with small letters refers to Adonai. So next week, that is your assignment that you must learn this week. I will send this one to your parents, and then they'll be able to remind you during the week. So then, let's go to the next slide. I'm using there an example. Exodus chapter 33, verse 6. Exodus chapter 33, verse 6. It says there, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. This verse uses Lord 3 times. There's Lord, there's Lord, there's Lord. Which Lord are those? Yahweh. And we have seen that on your Bibles as well. And then we use Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Small letters. And what Lord is that? That's Adonai. Just to show you some of the examples. So then we get to the second name of God. Second name of God. We mentioned Yahweh, and now we come to the second name of God. As soon as I can get back to my notes. And the second name of God is Adonai. Adonai. And this is the name that refers to God who is above all. So Yahweh, it refers to the unchanging God, or it communicates to us that God is unchanging. And Adonai communicates to us that God is above all. So this name is used to communicate, to show that God is superior to all people. God is superior to everything. And it shows that God has authority. God has authority. That's the second name, Adonai. And the third name is Elohim. Elohim. And the name refers to God as the high and exalted one. God is exalted. He is high above all. He is exalted. And it used to show that God has supreme power, He has supreme strength, He has supreme might. That no one can challenge God. So first one is Yahweh, the unchanging God. Second one is Adonai, the God who is above all. And the third one is Elohim, the high and exalted God. Then the last one we see is El Shaddai. El Shaddai. This one you will hear it in charismatic songs. They love using it. But who knows if they understand what it means. And this name refers to the God who has all power in heaven and on earth. So it's basically the name that God communicates to us, His greatness. His greatness. His greatness. So, brethren, these are the four names of God. First one, Yahweh. Second one, Adonai. Third one, Elohim. Fourth one, El Shaddai. And the Sunday school children who are not taking notes, I'm assuming that they are getting these names, because next week, the ones who are not taking notes are the first ones who are going to come and mention all these names. Yahweh, Adonai, Elohim, and El Shaddai. So this is where we're going to end this morning then. So Sunday school children, please remember then to memorize some of the things we have learned. You still have to, all of you, at one point, I still have to come and do all the 10 divisions of systematic theology. And I know which ones have done it. So next week, one of you is coming and doing it. And then you still have to remember the 4 ways in which we know that God exists. And then you need to remember the 4 names of God and what they communicate to us. So let's close our eyes and pray. Before then, but if anyone has any questions, you may mention to us. You have a question? Okay. So next week then, brethren, we will deal with the attributes of God. The attributes of God, meaning the character of God, or the ways in which God has expressed Himself to us as human beings. So please join us as well as we'll be dealing with the attributes of God. So let's close our eyes and pray. We thank you, O Lord. Indeed, Lord, we may be able to come and hear your word, be able to come and learn more about you. That indeed, O Lord, it may lead to more and better worship of you, O Lord. May you take these words and